So obviously yesterday we received the unfortunate news from Bulls media that Patrick Williams will likely be out for the season. It was initially reported that he would miss the season, but then it was later announced that he would be out for 4 to 6 months, which is a pretty big range. So we could see Patrick return as early as the end of February or in late April, which would be at the start of the playoffs. But in any event, it's a big loss for the Bulls. They're losing their starting power forward, their former number 4 overall pick. They had high aspirations for going into the season, and I really do feel for Patrick Williams this was going to be a critical offseason for him, and the guy just could not catch a break between the initial ankle injury that sidelined him for most of training camp and the preseason, and then he also suffered a minor shoulder injury in the first game of the season, and now this surgery to his wrist that is likely going to sideline him for most of the season, if not the whole season. And as the Bulls wait for Patrick to recover, now they have to decide what is going to be the best replacement option for him. And so in today's video, I'll be going over 5 options for the Bulls as alternatives for their power forward starting role. So what's going on, everyone? You were listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Obviously not the news we expected to hear after seeing Patrick land awkwardly on that flagrant foul call on Mitchell Robinson. I mentioned it in yesterday's video. I honestly thought that Patrick would likely miss a game or 2. So to go from that to missing the season was a shock. And it's especially a shock because the Bulls were already limited in the front court as it is. And it's part of the reason why they have struggled when it comes to rebounding, especially against bigger teams. So the Bulls are really faced with a dilemma here in terms of how do they fill that power forward spot? Do they start one of Javonte Green, Alize Johnson, or even Troy Brown Jr. maybe get some run at the 4, or are the Bulls forced to make a trade because of how small they are? And if they want to be a legitimate team, they have to try and get a little bigger to compete with some of the best teams in the league. Now, I've seen a lot of you comment on my recent videos, or even just various comments from people that are making on Twitter, that the Bulls should just trade Patrick Williams now, cut their losses, and try to bring in a big name. And let me first just say there is no way that happens. First of all, that would be incredibly cold of the Bulls to trade him after suffering an injury like that. Second, you don't trade a player when their value is at its lowest when they have a big injury. And finally, it would be incredibly premature to give up on Patrick, who is only 20 years old, because of an injury like this. Like, I saw some people saying, well, clearly he's just injury prone. That's actually not true at all. He was completely healthy last season, only missing 1 game all year, and was healthy throughout college and high school, having never had a major injury prior. Sometimes these things just happen, and I wouldn't consider Patrick to be injury prone. So what are the Bulls' options? Well, let me start by the first 2 options that are the most obvious with guys who are already on the Bulls roster. Number 1, and I think it's the most likely option, and that is starting Javonte Green at the 4. We saw the Bulls go this route in the preseason when Patrick wasn't available, and of course, Green got the bulk of those minutes in the game against the Knicks after it was announced that Patrick wouldn't be able to return. And honestly, it's not a horrible alternative. I mean, I said before, Patrick Williams is a better player than Javonte Green, but I did think that it would potentially make some sense to start Green over Patrick while he was still suffering from his lingering injuries. And it was because of the energy that Green brought on both ends of the floor that really excite me about putting him in the starting lineup. The Bulls moved a lot faster when Green was in the lineup, and they played with more grit and hustle when Green was in. And the team just seemed more hype as a whole when he was on the court. Again, not saying that Green was a better option or a better player than Patrick Williams, but that there was something to be said about how this team played and Javonte's box plus minus alone when he was on the floor. The next alternative, option number 2, is to start Alize Johnson. Now, like Javonte, Alize is one of those players who clearly isn't as talented or has the kind of potential as someone like Patrick does, but like Javonte, they both have infectious energy, hustle, and grit that you love to see from players. And for both of these guys, they had to really fight their way into the league and have something to prove more than some other players in the NBA. And this could really be an opportunity for them to take advantage of playing on a good team and being a key piece in the starting lineup on a good team. Now for Alize, he's not as scrappy as someone like Javonte is on the defensive end, but he is bigger than Javonte and is a better fit as a 4 because of his size and his incredible rebounding ability. Johnson is one of those guys who will never give up on a play and will fight for rebounds even over guys that are 5 inches taller than him. And it's not a bad option for the Bulls, but he is slightly on the smaller side even still for that type of power forward role, especially compared to other big 4s in the league. And as much as I like Alize, he's slowly becoming one of my favorite Bulls players. He's really not a starter in the NBA. Not on a good team anyway, maybe on a bad rebuilding team, but not for the Bulls, who are trying to really be a strong team in the playoffs this year. So those are the two, like I said, most obvious options as alternatives for the Bulls. The next three are actually going to be trade scenarios that I think should be considered. I know there are some free agents available that haven't been picked up by any teams, guys like DeMarcus Cousins, James Ennis, which they're not bad options, but for the Bulls, I'm looking for bigger plays, guys that will actually be able to replace the shoes of someone like Patrick Williams, or even better. Not only that, but the Bulls would have to waive a current player to bring in a free agent as a result. So let's look at some of these trade options, and the first and probably the most talked about option is trading for Marvin Bagley. Now, I've talked about this before, and it's no secret that Marvin Bagley isn't happy in Sacramento, and quite frankly, I don't blame him. That franchise has not set him up for success, and he's slowly started becoming this hated player in Sacramento because he was drafted before Luka Doncic, which again isn't his fault that the Kings front office and their incompetence selected him over Luka or Trae Young. The Kings have basically taken Bagley out of the rotation, and Bagley, for what he can do, should at a minimum be a rotational player in the NBA. I'm not saying he's a great player, has star potential, but he's good enough to be a solid big man in the league. Bagley was the #1 recruit coming out of high school in 2017. He was the #2 overall pick in 2018, and he's only 22 years old. It's not like this is a player that is past their prime and going to be on the decline soon. And I think in a new environment that is going to need his skill set and what he offers, he could thrive and do well. Bagley averaged over 14 points per game and 7.5 rebounds so far for his career. He's not a great defender, not the best three-point shooter or free throw shooter, but he can give you scoring, size, and rebounding, which the Bulls are going to need with how limited they are in the front court. Now, the question is, what type of trade package would work for something like this? I mean, the benefit for the Bulls in this scenario is Bagley's trade value is pretty low, and everyone knows the Kings are trying to move on from him. I've brought this up before, but would a straight trade of Coby White for Bagley be enough? I personally wouldn't want to trade Coby for Bagley because I do think that the Bulls have already shown they're going to need his scoring coming off the bench. And that being said, though, the Bulls are crowded in the front court and on the wing. They're going to need to figure out what they want to do or what they want to sacrifice to balance out this roster, and Coby could be one of those pieces because he's likely the player with the highest trade value out of everyone coming off the bench. But for Bagley, what I think would make the most sense and might actually work for both sides is Derrick Jones Jr. and the lottery pick, protected pick from Portland, basically flipping exactly what they received in the Lowry Markkanen trade. I don't really want to trade Derrick Jones Jr., and I've been a little surprised that Billy Donovan hasn't given him any playing time whatsoever for a guy who was an athletic freak, can electrify the crowd and play decent defense. But if you're not going to play him, why not include him in a trade that might entice the Kings to give them some wing depth? And because it's the Kings and they're always in a perpetual state of rebuilding, they're probably going to look for a first-round pick, especially for a guy that they're not even playing themselves. And part of the reason why I don't want to include Coby White in a trade package is because Bagley's trade value is so low. Why are you going to give up someone like Coby White for Bagley when you can probably get him for less? Now, the fourth option, which is another trade scenario, and I really, really like this one, but I think it's probably the most unlikely of them all, is the Bulls making a trade for Myles Turner. Now, I mentioned this in yesterday's video shortly after the news broke about Patrick, and I do think there is an outside chance the Bulls could make a trade like this work. Part of it because Myles Turner has been in trade rumors for the Pacers for over 2 years now, and with the Pacers off to a slow start of their season at 1-5, they're likely going to start thinking about making changes to the non-fit duo of Sabonis and Turner. And what I love about Turner is he is an incredible rim protector with his shot blocking ability. The guy led the league in blocks last season at 3.4 per game. He's an okay scorer. He averaged 12.6 points per game last season. So far, he's averaging 13.6 this year. He's not the best rebounder for his size anyway at 6'11", but 6.5 rebounds a game isn't terrible. And when you have him paired alongside Vucevic, who is an elite rebounder and scorer, but not the best defender and rim protector, then you have that balance between the two in the front court. In theory, it should be a great fit. Floor spacing would be somewhat of a problem, and you see that as a challenge right now with Sabonis and Turner on the Pacers, but for a team that is in need of big guys in the paint and rim protection, the Bulls could certainly use someone like him. As far as the trade itself, well, the problem is the Bulls would have to give up a fair amount, partially because you have to match Turner's salary, but also because despite Turner being in trade rumors for a while now, he's still a valuable player in this league, and the Pacers aren't just going to take a rotational piece in exchange for him. So in this instance, I'm going to say that a good trade option would be for Coby White and Derrick Jones Jr., mainly Derrick Jones for the salaries to work for Myles Turner. And the reason I included Coby in this one is that he has decent trade value for the Pacers in exchange for Turner. That would be enough to potentially entice them. And the Pacers are a little limited in the backcourt and could use a combo guard, a young combo guard who is a strong scorer and outside shooter. Again, I don't like the idea of giving up on Coby White, but the Pacers aren't going to entertain much less for someone like Turner. And to be honest, it might not even be enough. Derrick Jones Jr. added, makes the salaries work, but the Pacers may even want to have a second round pick for it as well. And then finally, the last trade scenario, an alternative to Patrick Williams, is the Bulls trading for Jerami Grant. And the more I think about it, this scenario is even less likely than Myles Turner because Jerami Grant is a borderline all-star with the way that he has played the last couple of seasons. But with the Pistons being as bad as they are, and the fact that they're in still a full rebuild mode, you would probably start to think that it's possible they may look to move on from Jerami Grant to get some value and assets to assist in that rebuild rather than waste away Grant's prime. Grant is 27, he fits the Bulls timeline, he's a combo small and power forward that gives the added versatility, he has the size the Bulls need, but also shooting and scoring. The guy averaged 22.3 points per game last season on solid efficiency. Yes, it was on a bad Pistons team, but he was also playing at a high level on a contending Nuggets team the year prior. Salary makes it a little bit tricky though, given he's making $20 million, so the Bulls would have to trade enough to match that. So in this instance, the Bulls would trade Coby White, Troy Brown Jr., and the first round pick from Portland. This gives the Pistons enough of an incentive, in my view anyway, and value in return by getting two young players with still some upside potential and also a future first round pick to go along with it, which fits the timeline of their rebuild. Again, very unlikely, and it's probably not enough for someone of Grant's caliber, but man, oh man, a starting five of Lonzo, Lavine, DeRozan, Grant, and Vucevic would be pretty scary. It wouldn't be perfect, defense would still be an issue, offense in the second unit would be a big struggle for the Bulls, especially if you're losing Coby and Troy Brown Jr., but that starting lineup would be fire on offense. Anyway, I'm sure there are a multitude of options for replacing the void of Patrick Williams, and I'm curious to see how the Bulls look to fill this gap they are now currently facing. Let me know in the comments, what do you guys think would be the most likely scenario and approach the Bulls will take, and let me know what other trade scenarios you would like to see to round out this roster. And as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again as always, guys, for tuning in, and I will catch you in the next one.